I've got the line drawing. I've done the line drawing for you, and I just want to explain why I've got these stronger lines. I've obviously put the nostril in there. I've got these stronger lines on the line drawing this time, and I've done that for a reason. The reason that I've done that is because if we just look at the reference photograph, there's so much going on in this face. It's going to be hard enough as it is. And I wanted to make it a little bit easier. So what I've done is this line here is actually this line around here. This line here is this one that's coming down here. And this line here is this line here. And so what that's doing is, and I've obviously put the nostril in, and what that's doing is it's sort of putting some landmarks into this massive fur that we've got to draw. We've got the jawline, obviously we can see the jawline around here. The rest of it we should be able to work out from these 3 landmarks. I'm hoping that it's not going to be too difficult to work it out. We've obviously got the end of the lovely fur on top of his head there, but I just thought if I put those in, it might just help divide up this massive fluff and curls. So that's why I've done that. Hopefully that will help. If you don't need that, then just ignore it. You don't need to draw those in darker unless you want to. That's up to you. So if we have a look at the surface that I'm going to be drawing on, this particular fur, we could draw it on hot press paper, we could draw it on pastel mat, we could draw it on drafting film. So I've decided that I'm going to draw this project on pastel mat. It's going to be not necessarily easier, but it'll be faster to draw it on pastel mat. Because we're going to be putting the pigment down onto the paper and then lifting it back off to create these lovely little bits of almost like little clumps of fur and all these lovely curls, it's going to be easier to put the pigment down and then to take it back off, and that's going to be faster and easier to do that on a pastel mat or a drafting film rather than a hot press paper. It would just take a little bit longer on a hot press paper. And the other thing is with hot press paper, there are so many different types of hot press paper that some papers will allow you to lift the pigment off better, and some papers will hold on to that pigment and it'll be a little bit harder to lift off. I draw on the Fabriano Artistico, and that's quite good at allowing the Tombow eraser and the kneadable eraser to go back in and lift the pigment off. But that's still going to take longer to do it on the hot press paper than it will on the pastel mat or something like the drafting film. The drafting film, you can lift the pigment off quite easily, but I thought I'll do it on the pastel mat. The techniques then, when we put the pigment down and lift it back off, you will still be able to do it on the hot press paper if you want to do it on the hot press paper, but it will take a little bit longer. So that's the reason that I'm going to draw on the pastel mat. So let's have a look at some of the colours that I'm going to use in this project. These are the colours that are jumping out at me as I look at the project for the first time. They're not necessarily the colours that I will eventually use in the project. So if you see me suggest a colour now and I don't use that in the project, that's just because I'm always thinking after I've put a layer of colour down, what colour do I need next? I don't sort of decide right from the outset what colours that I need. I gather a few pencils together with things that I might need, but I'm always sort of adjusting and rethinking the colours as I go along. So if you see a colour that I say that I'm going to use now but I don't use in the project, that's just because I've changed my mind as I've gone through it, and the drawing started to come to life on the piece of paper, and also there might be other colours that I need to bring in. But let's just have a look at some of the colours that I think I'm going to use. If we have a look at this eye, right in the middle of that lovely highlight there, we've got a really quite intense blue colour. I'm going to start with the Indanthrene blue, right in the middle of that. And I may even put a little bit of the ultramarine, might mix a little bit of that. Just depends what I can fit into the eye when I actually come to look at the eye. I like to use the polychromos when I'm working on the eyes because they're nice and translucent pencils. They're transparent colours and they just let the light come through. So either the Indanthrene blue or the ultramarine, either, it doesn't really matter, but one of those two colours I'll put into that highlight in the eye. I also need a little bit of green in that eye as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in permanent green olive. Bring a little bit of green into that eye. Any olivey green that you've got will work. I'm going to use the permanent green olive, but anything that you've got that's that sort of yellow green, that's the sort of green that you're looking for in there, along with a bit of the earth green. I'm going to bring a little bit of the earth green in as well. Just around the back of the eye. Just around the back of the eye, I can see a little bit of the earth green. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that in as well. The other colours that are going to go in there are the coal grey one. I should be using the coal grey one. I'll use a bit of the coal grey one as a base in there. And just on the underside of the eye, I'm going to use some of the Payne's grey to get that darker colour into that eye. So I shall use some of the Payne's grey in there as well. And just along the edge of the eye, we've also got a slightly darker grey, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of the coal grey too in there, just to bring a little bit of that grey into that colour. There is a bit of red, it's a reflection right in the middle of that eye there, but I'm probably not going to bother with that. I don't think the eye will be big enough to get that in. And then the other colours that I'm fairly sure that I'll use will be some of the dark sepia and probably also the black in there. They're the colours that I shall use for the eye. Bring those colours in there. It just depends how big the eye is when I actually get there. Around the edge of the eye, you can see we've got this lovely green colour, and I should be bringing in a little bit of the olive brown around the edge. This is the olive brown 50%. Little bit of the olive brown. You could still go in with something like the olive green yellowish as well. That was the olive brown 50% was the luminance. This is the polychromos. Anything like that that you've got that will put a little bit of a greeny yellow colour into that eye area. And then underneath the eye around here, I should go back with the coal grey one to put the base layer down. Perhaps a little bit of that earth green again, and also a little bit of the coal grey 5, and maybe even the coal grey 6 or the Payne's grey, just to darken down under that eye. So I should be bringing a little bit of that in under the eye there. If we have a look at the colours that are on top of the head, we've got some lovely earthy, creamy colours going in there. The base layer that I shall use in there will probably be the warm grey one. I'll bring in some of the warm grey one. You can see if I just zoom into that bit there, go around there, you can see that there's the warm grey one coming through this area there. So I shall use some of the warm grey one in there. I shall also use some of the burnt ochre 10% in there to get some of that peachiness. You can see some of the peachiness coming through around there. So I should use the burnt ochre 10%. I'll also use some of the brown ochre 10% just to create that lovely creaminess in the fur there. So I shall put that one into the mix. Obviously we'll need to blend. I should be using the buff titanium. That's not really going to show up there, but I'll be using the buff titanium from the luminance to blend some of the colours together, and maybe even a little bit. This is pink white from the luminance, maybe a little bit of the pink white as well, just to blend. I'm going to put that one in there just in case, and I'll also blend with that warm grey one that I was using. If we have a look around here, if we have a look in this bit around here, there's also there's grey colour in there, but it's quite a purpley red sort of grey colour. And so I'm going to be using the sepia 10% to get some of the darker bits in those darker areas of the fur. So I should be using some of the sepia in there. So on this side, the fleece is warmer, and on this side, the fleece is a little bit warmer. So what I want is, where I've used the sepia 10% to get the darker bits on the warm side of the fleece, I'm going to use a little bit of the Payne's grey. This is the Payne's grey 30% from the luminance to get the darker bits in the areas where the fur is a bit cooler. You could just use your cold greys. You could just use your cold grey 3 if you haven't got the Payne's grey. If we have a look over this side of the fur, the dark bits in there, I shall be using the Warm Earth 5% to get that lovely, it's quite a warm colour in there, but it's darker. I'll be using the Warm Earth 5%. Probably also be using the Warm Earth 40% in there. If I bring a little bit of the 40% in there as well. Bring that in. I might need a little bit of nugget in places as well. This is nugget from the Polychromos. Might need a little bit of nugget where it goes a little bit darker in there. And the other colour that might be quite useful, this is the Warm Grey 2. So I can just see a little bit of that sort of Warm Grey 2 colour around there. So I'm just going to bring in a little bit of the Warm Grey 2 as well into that fur. In this area just above the eye, we're back to some of the greens again, and I'll be back to using the earth green that we've already used in and around the eye. I'll use the earth green. I'll use that Warm Grey 2 that I was talking about. There's also right in the middle there, there's quite a dark bit, and I'll probably go in with one of the dark cold grey colours there. So this is the cold grey 5, something like that. Might even need to go a little bit darker, might need to go to the Payne's grey, the cold grey 6, but the cold grey 5 looks like it might work at the minute, so I'm going to put that to one side as well. The other colour that I will use in and around areas, if I just zoom in there and just bring this little bit in here, we've got the olive brown, and I'll be bringing in some of the olive brown to get some of those darker bits in. This is the olive brown from the luminance, so that might be quite a useful colour. All throughout the fur, really, if I just have a look around here, all throughout the fur, I can see that olive brown colour. I can see the olive brown 50%, and even the olive brown 10%. This is the olive brown 10% from the Carandash, the luminance. So I should be using that. But the other colours that might prove really useful are the raw umber colours. This is the raw umber. This is the raw umber 10%. You can see it's just a little bit more brown. So that's the olive brown 10%. This is the raw umber 10%. It's a bit closer to the Warm Grey 2. So you could always use that if you didn't have the raw umber. But I shall be using the raw umber 10% and probably the raw umber 50% as well. Just where I might need a little bit of that earthy brown colour coming in. So I shall use that one, or I might use that one in there. If we just have a quick look at the ear, it's got the earth green coming through, so I shall use a bit of the earth green in there. I shall use the greys, those cool greys, but also a little bit of the cinnamon. I'm just going to put a bit of cinnamon in there, a little bit of the cinnamon in the ear, and just to darken that down a little bit where it's right in the middle of the ear here. I'll probably also use a little bit of the violet pink just to darken that down. This is the violet pink from the luminance. That's sort of just a slightly, it's a slightly stronger pink colour. If you didn't have that, you could use something like your Venetian red from your Polychromos. If we just have a look at the nose, we've got quite a dark colour for the nostrils, so I shall probably use some of the black and the dark sepia. So if I just put a little bit of the dark sepia down there, and probably a bit of the black as well, just to make it go really, really quite dark. I'll probably overlap those to get the depth there. Just over the edge of the nose up here, I'll just use a little bit, or I might use a little bit of the raw umber 50% to get that sort of browny colour. I might even use a little bit of the olive brown 50% in there as well to add a little bit of the green. In fact, as I've just put that down, I think the olive brown might be a slightly better colour. So you could use either of those colours really, whichever colour you fancy. I'll use a little bit of the Warm Earth again around the tip of the nose, just around the tip of the nose around here. And if you didn't have that, you could just use a little bit of the burnt ochre. This is the burnt ochre here. So you could use either of those colours. I don't think that would really matter there. And to be honest, I'll probably use a little bit of the burnt ochre just going up the nose anyway. You can see that it's just a little bit orange coloured there. So I'll probably use a little bit of that. I'll use the coal greys again and the Payne's grey 30% on these darker bits of fur. And I'll use the earth green where I can see that the green, or the fur is just a little bit more green. It's a little bit more of an olive green colour down here. So I'll probably use a little bit more of the olive green yellowish. So I will use the olive green yellowish around here and also around here, just where you can see the slightly greener bits in the fur. I'll use the cold greys around the nose. There's definitely the cooler greys in there, but I don't know if you can see that. If I just circle those, you can see that every now and again we've got these pinky purple colours coming in. So this pinky colour down here, I'll probably just use a little bit of the Warm Earth 40% and also the violet pink again to create that pink colour just coming down there. It's not much, but just a little bit of pink down there. But on the other side, so here where it's cooler, where the fur goes a little bit cooler, you can see that the pink is just a little bit brighter. So on this side, it's a little bit warmer. The pink was a bit warmer. And on this side, it's a bit cooler. So what I shall do is I shall either use the ultramarine pink to bring a little bit of pink in there. And if you didn't have that, you could just use your light magenta. This is the light magenta from the Polychromos, and you can see that they're really very, very similar colours. So either of those pencils, just to bring in a little bit of pink where we need a bit of pink there. If I just move on to this little bit around here, that's back to the Warm Earth colours around there. And that's pretty much it, I think, in terms of the colours. That's pretty much most of the colours that I've mentioned. The only other colour that I will mention is just back to this bit down here. Where I've just said that I'll use a bit of the Warm Earth, there's also a little bit of the brown coming through there, and I shall probably use a little bit of the sepia 50%. Through that area as well, just to get the darker bits of the fur. But I think that's pretty much it. I think I'm sure I've missed something somewhere, but like I say, they're just my initial thoughts anyway. Once you really start to get to work on the project, that's when you start to make a decision after you've put every layer of pencil down. So, you know, I might change bits as I go on, but on the whole, that's the sort of starting point for the colours that I'm going to use. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the techniques that I'm going to be using. This is a little bit of pastel mat. So if we have a look at the fur texture on the main face of the alpaca, well, that's going to be just the usual little pencil strokes that are what I call directional pencil strokes. So I'm just literally putting my pencil down on the paper and I'm just going to flick the pencil off so that I get a nice flicked end on the one side, and I'll get the blunt end on the other side, but that's okay because every now and again I might just take the pencil back the other way. So I shall be creating the fur with that sort of what I call directional stroke. That's how I'll be creating most of the fur around the face. The fur on top of the head, I'm going to create a little bit differently. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to carry on with this this colour. What I'm going to do is I'll be adding a base layer down. And I'm just doing this really, really quickly. And I'll probably be using circular strokes for most of this because I want it to look quite soft and fuzzy underneath. So I'll be creating, and I may need to put several layers down to get the depth. And I'll be using light pressure because that will be easier to lift off afterwards. If I just go over this with a lighter colour, just so that you can, I just want to fill in the grain a little bit so that you can see when I've lifted it off. Putting lighter colours in between the darker layers on pastel mat is really quite useful. Helps to get rid of that grain. So I've just gone over that with the warm grey 2 with really light pressure. Let's just go back over this with the dark sepia. So I'll be building up the underlayers. And then what I'm going to do is I shall take either my kneadable eraser or my my slice tool, my craft knife if you don't have a slice tool. The Tombow eraser doesn't work very well on the pasta mat, so it'll be the kneadable eraser or it'll be the slice tool, or if you've got a craft knife, that's fine. I shall shape the kneadable eraser into the shape of the tufts of hair, and then I'll just lift it off. So I'll go in and I'll lift it off, and it could be that I have to do this several times just to get that depth that I want. So you can see that I've started to already bring out a little bit of that lighter hair, those lighter tufts. And I just keep dabbing it, and I dab it quite gently. I don't want to press on really hard. There we go. So I've started to dab that off a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll just go back in and just shape it. Perhaps darken it, shape it. So it's not a particularly difficult technique on the pastel mat. It's quite easy to lift that pigment off, easier than it can be on the hot press paper. Like I say, it really depends on what sort of hot press paper you're working on as to how easy it is to lift it off. And then I'll just shape the tufts. That's how I'll be creating all these lovely tufts of hair that we've got. And we can make those tufts that we create, we can make these tufts then go in any direction that we want them to go in. What I'll probably do is I will be using the kneadable eraser to create the big bits of hair, or the big bits of fleece that I want to go in, and then I'll go over the top afterwards with the slice tool. But you can just keep going backwards and forwards and just working the fur however you want it. And that's how I'll be building it up. So that's pretty much it. I'll also be building it up down the neck in the same way, but obviously we'll be keeping the texture just slightly different, but it'll still be a case of putting the pigment on and then taking it off. The only other pencil strokes that I'll be using are probably just the little circular strokes, especially if I want to blend, and perhaps scribbles as well, because we've got quite a scruffy bit of fur. So the scribbles are just the circular strokes, but I just spread them out a little bit so they don't create one big block of colour afterwards. And then, you know, I'll probably be doing some curved strokes to get some of the longer bits. The curved strokes might go both ways so that I get the wavy bit on, so that I get the wispy bit on one side or the other side. And the only other thing is the little directional stroke, just to start to get a little bit of texture where the fur's a little bit shorter. So here it's a bit longer. The stroke is exactly the same stroke as this, but the strokes are longer and these strokes are a bit shorter. And that's pretty much it. That's all the pencil strokes that I'll be using. And that's it. I shall be using the kneadable eraser. If I put that there, I'll be using the slice tool, but of course, if you've got a craft knife, that will work just as well. I'll obviously be using those pencils that or those colours that I've said. And that's pretty much it. That's all I'm going to be using. That's all I can think of that I'll be using. Okay, so I'll leave it there for now, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.